ex-alcoholic. Thanks for the kind words, Blake. Really appreciate the group and all the hospitality. It's amazing just, coming down here and seeing all the friendly faces and the people I've gotten to know over the past couple of years who've come visit us, our home group, and our anniversaries or speak in our meeting, and then the times I've gotten to be down here. And, I'm just very grateful for every opportunity I get to speak. Just, when I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I felt like I had nothing to offer anybody, and just couldn't imagine how I'd ever stay sober or be able to really help anybody. So my sobriety date's November 12th of 2007. I live in Apex. My home group is the There's a Solution group. We meet in Cary off Jones Franklin Road. So come on out Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 p.m. So I'll just start from the beginning. I'll try and tell you what I was like, what happened to me, what I'm like now. But preface it by saying, I think I grew up in what was a pretty normal home. I don't want to spend a ton of time on my childhood. Just frankly, I don't think it made me an alcoholic. I've heard people with, tragic childhoods, really difficult people who grew up with a silver spoon in their mouth, and we all end up in the same place. But, I two parents, grew up in Cary, moved around a little bit as a kid before settling in there. And I had two good parents. I'm one of four kids. There was a lot going on in the household growing up. My parents introduced me to God. I went to church. I grew up Catholic. I played sports. Really had, for the most part, every opportunity, a kid could need to be successful. And for the most part, my life was very normal growing up. I didn't really start having trouble till I was a little bit older, getting into middle school. And I think, again, this was just normal. Most people, that time in their life, it's pretty awkward. And my issue was I could never really talk to girls. And I really, I was getting to that point in life where I really wanted to talk to women. And I also felt like I could never really fit in with anybody. I wanted to be a skater, but I wasn't very good at skateboarding. Wasn't very good at sports. Still not. I had this older brother I looked up to a bunch. And he was, the best. He could play guitar. He was, star on the football team. Every girl wanted to date him. And I just wanted to be like my brother. He was my big brother. He was 2 years older than me. And I just looked up to him in every way possible and followed him around everywhere, his friends, and just wanted to be one of the cool kids. And one day I found him in the basement of my house smoking pot. And I was probably 12 years old. And I immediately was like, oh my God, I got to tell my parents, he's going to go to hell. He's committing a sin, he's a good kid. And, he being who he was and very good at what he does, he convinced me to do it with him. I was like, okay, didn't take much. And that was my introduction to, an outside substance. And shortly after, I was hanging out with him and his friend. And I don't know why they thought it was a good idea, but to introduce me to my parents' liquor cabinet. And I just remember taking a shot of vodka, a shot of whiskey, a shot of rum, a shot of gin. Every liquor bottle my parents had, I took a shot of it, 7, 8 shots to the face at 12 years old. And as I took every one of those drinks, I'd feel that warmth hit my body, and I just got to this point. I remember it was like the clouds parted, and I felt so good, and it was like, man, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. And I had a great day. They kind of kicked me out of the house real quick before my parents are going to get home because they didn't want me to, get caught. And I just wandered around my neighborhood with my friends and, wrestled and did crazy stuff and rode our bikes around and had a great day and went home, slept perfect. I didn't black out. I didn't throw up. I just loved being drunk. And I made a kind of a commitment, like, man, I'm going to do this every day. This is a great feeling. So, a few days later on a random Wednesday night, I went back to that liquor cabinet by myself at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when my parents weren't home, and I started taking shots again. I invited this girl over this time. I don't know why. I thought I'd look cool. And I ended up making out with this girl. That's what happened. Apparently when you give them a little alcohol, you drink some alcohol and you lose your ambitions. And it was answer number 2 to my problems. I'm like, not only does this make me feel really good, but it makes it a lot easier to talk to women. And, that was kind of the story for me, is I felt like it solved a lot of problems very early on for me it took away my fear, my inhibitions, and it just made me be able to live, in my own skin comfortably. And it became an obsession very quickly for me. Later on in life, I towards the end of my drinking, I just was baffled by the fact of how much I obsessed over drinking and finding something to make me feel better. I mean, it just drove everything I did. And I noticed that other people didn't respond to alcohol that way. But for me, it did. And, I quit playing sports. Like, I was trying to get out of football practice in 8th grade at this point because I wanted to go home and drink or smoke weed with the kids in the neighborhood. And, it just became more important than everything. And, by 10th grade, I had quit the 3 different sports I was playing. I started failing out of all my classes. I got kicked out of the school I was going to. I was constantly in trouble with my parents, and I was that, poster example of a kid who just got involved in a lot of trouble, and just all of a sudden, my parents didn't know what to do with me. Luckily, my brother was just getting in 10 times more trouble than I was. I mean, he was the most careless person. I was pretty good. Like, I was smart about not getting caught, but he got caught doing everything. My parents were just constantly on his case, and, between the both of us, they were just in full panic mode, and it was pretty sad thinking back, because I, as a parent today, I don't know how I'd handle it. But anyways, to fast forward, barely made it through high school, drank and did all kinds of extracurriculars as much as I could, didn't put any emphasis on the grades, and I think a lot of my teachers literally just passed me because they felt sorry for me. I was a pretty good kid for the most part. I didn't cause a scene. I'd always try. I thought I was kind of a genius because I would just get C's on all my tests by guessing and never studying, and pat myself on the back how much smarter I was than everybody else who tried so hard. And I finished up high school and barely passed, with no ambitions to go to college. And I was just so happy to finally be 18, have a set of car keys and a cell phone and job and a little bit of money in my pocket, and I could do whatever I wanted. And that's exactly what I did. As soon as I turned 18 years old, I just turned loose. And my parents, I think, realized that they couldn't control me. They tried with my brother, and they kind of just gave up and turned the other way. My dad was pretty hands off. He was traveled a lot and had his own problems. My mom just didn't want to even acknowledge it. So things got really bad. By the time I was 18 years old, I was just full blown alcoholic, and a lot of other stuff. I used pretty much every illicit substance that someone put in front of me. I tried out, whether it was a hallucinogen or an upper or a downer or a prescription drug or street drug. Like, I started off just basically doing pot and ended up doing the hardest of drugs just because, one thing led to another. And I don't want that to be the emphasis of my story. I say that just because I think a lot of us grew up in a generation where, it was always around. And 18 years old, I got this awesome job. I'm working at a hotel. My job was, I was the houseman was my title, and I would show up, I'd maybe smoke a little weed on the way there, and I'd get to bake the cookies that we put at the front of the hotel, and then I set up the happy hour for all the people coming in, beer, wine on the ice, and I'd put up a little wine cart, and then I'd cook some hors d'oeuvres or put them together, a little cheese plate. And I had a walkie-talkie and a set of keys to every room in the hotel, and very little oversight. The GM left at 5, just me and this other guy who turned out to be just like me, working the front desk, and we had the place to ourselves, and we'd have a great time. And I would, of course, make sure the beer was cold and the wine was fresh and aged just right. And, I'd get a little page in the walkie-talkie, hey, so, this person's at Terminal 2, go pick them up. And I'd jump in the little Sprinter van, drive up there, scoop them up, come back, drop them off, and then that was my night until about 8 o'clock, and then I'd break down the happy hour, and, I'd usually get some little task to do, like, vacuum these rooms, or, clean up this mess, or repair this thing that broke. And most of the time, I just kind of disappeared. Nobody knew where I was, but I was, having fun. And they paid me for that. It was a great job, but it really just kind of excelled my drinking. And then I'd get off work, and I'd find wherever my friends were, whatever party it was. I found another easy way. I could make my money go a little further if I helped connect certain people with other people to get what they wanted. It was not a very good drug deal, I'll just say, to be very clear. but it helped me to continue to drink and, have extra money in my pocket. And I just liked the party scene. I liked always going somewhere and being that guy, or, hanging out with different people. And, I was starting to have a lot of trouble with like the police and getting tickets and getting in trouble and, showing up to court and mandated classes for underage drinking or getting caught with paraphernalia. And, my parents were just ultimate enablers, trying to make sure I didn't have some kind of felony on my record and intervening. I tried going to school at that point. I thought, okay, well, I'll go to Wake Tech and, the community college up there, and, I'll try, and if I just show up to school and do what I've always done, I'll be successful. And it doesn't really work well when you haven't done school in 5 years, basically, because you've been screwing off. I started to fail out of all my classes, and was showing up drinking, and your teachers aren't on your back. The principal's not going to call your mom when you're at community college. They just kind of look at you and say, why are you here? Because you're paying for this and you don't have to be. And that didn't go very well. So, things progressed. And, I think one of the big turning points I was trying to highlight is when I got to, I don't know, somewhere 18, 19 years old. I remember pulling up to the ATM at the bank on a Friday to take my money out of the bank and realize my account was negative. Someone had thrown a brick through my car window the night before. My girlfriend had broken up with me. I was feeling really terrible physically from the withdrawals from alcohol. I had no friends, and I realized I didn't have any hobbies or any interests, and I was zero prospects for any success in my life. And I'm 19 years old, and it just dawned on me, like all those videos you see as a kid in school about how alcohol and drugs can be addictive and ruin your life. I realized that was true. And it was just a small moment of clarity where I could see, my life is going terribly wrong and I need to do something about it. And I was afraid to go home. I was, didn't know what to do. And I just had this idea, like, I'm just going to move. And if I move, I can get away from everybody and everything and all the people who are looking for me and the people I owe money to and my family and all the people worried about me and on my case, and I can just live somewhere else and start over fresh. And if nobody knows who I am and I have no reputation, then I'll do okay, and I'll get away from all the people who are bad influences in my life. And I moved to Boone, North Carolina, and enrolled in Caldwell Community College. It's a beautiful campus. Here we go to Boone, drive up there. It's one of the best views in the town. But I made a firm commitment. I was going to go up there, and I'm not going to drink, and I'm not going to party. And, I lasted like a week. I remember showing up to these first classes in the fall, and, the excitement of a new school year. Everybody's got their, showing up, fresh and ready to learn and excited about the future. And I was there just terrified of everybody and everything that was coming. And I remember, made friends with this other guy in the class who was wearing a tie-dye shirt, and the next thing I know, he became my new best friend up there, and I was right back doing all the same stuff and drinking and partying, and he introduced me to all the other people that were, bad news. And very quickly I found myself drinking by myself in my little apartment with no friends and none of the familiar things from back home, and just hiding out drinking. And this started a period in my life where I knew I had a problem. I was starting to really hate myself because I was, failing out of everything. And I went to go see this doctor because I was convinced I had, some kind of mental problem. I always knew there was something wrong with me. Now I know it's alcoholism. But at the time, I just didn't know what it was. Is it mental illness? Is it something else? I remember seeing a psychiatrist, and he very kindly wrote me a prescription to 2 different drugs that, one would calm me down a lot. The other one would really help me focus. And if I took them all and drank, then I would be at the perfect equilibrium, is what I thought. And really, it just induced like an instant kind of brownout and had zero inhibition and made my hands very sticky. And I just kind of, came, like, things just escalated 10 times worse. I'm just doing the same things as before, but just a complete train wreck. And, I started bouncing around that point. I failed out of school again. I kind of realized I'm not going to be very good at school. And I started, going to live with my parents and other people and just trying to find, like, crashing on people's couches and still drinking. The party kind of ended for me like the last days of me. I was living in this apartment with my two friends. I was living in Boone again at the time. I was not going to school anymore. The kitchen had just dishes piled up in the sink. On one wall was just cases of beer and empty liquor bottles all over the counter and floor. My room was a complete disaster. I think I had one towel and it had never been washed in 6 months. I wasn't sleeping. I was like 170 pounds. I was just, basically living to drink. It became more important than everything else in life. And terrible feeling waking up in the morning every day and just wondering how you're going to get through the day. Just that dread of like coming to, and the first thought I would have every single day is, where am I going to get another drink from? Searching through the couch cushions for change, or seeing who had $7 so I could buy a 12-pack of Busch Ice at the gas station down the street. I became so depressed. And at the time, I remember very vividly just having this feeling of, any form of hope of my life getting better was just completely gone. I kind of gave up. Like, this is how I'm going to live my life for what it's worth. And it's pretty sad at 20 years old, that's how I felt. And I remember going back home to Raleigh one weekend. I wanted to go to a concert. And I stopped by my parents' house. I hadn't been sleeping, hadn't been eating, hadn't been just drinking. And, I was in really bad shape. And I was, at this point where a lot of times I would drink and I would black out. I'd end up either fighting somebody or crying about, this girl that left me 3 months earlier, or, something really ridiculous, absurd, and embarrassing everybody. Like, I just never knew what was going to happen when I drank. And, I thought about suicide a lot and just how I didn't want to live anymore. And, that day at my parents' house, I got really drunk. I took a bunch of pills. I got in a fight with my friends that came over. My parents called an old high school buddy to come over and kind of babysit me because they were worried about me. And ended up getting kicked out of my parents' house, walked the grocery store, stole a bunch of beer, went to the woods, drank it. Then my mom finds me somehow, drives me back home. And that day ended up me trying to kill myself in my parents' house. And, very tragic day in my entire family's, life, right? Like, no parent wants to find their kid in that situation. And, I remember the ambulance coming to get me and making me drink charcoal and drive me to the hospital and kind of coming in out of consciousness. And, being in a hospital bed, screaming at a doctor that I need pain medication. Because anytime I'm in a hospital is an opportunity to scam a doctor for opiates or something, make me feel better. Because I'm in so much pain. I'm more important than everybody else there. And, then coming to handcuffed in an ambulance, going to this psych ward. And I remember getting there and being really angry that I was there. Like, how dare these people put me in here? Really, I was court ordered to be there involuntarily. But, I was still really drunk and on all other substances, and eventually kind of came to, started withdrawing really hard. And I can't tell you how long it was. It's probably 24 hours. I'm sitting in that little day room with a bunch of other crazy people and looking around. And honestly, it looked like any place I'd hang out with, but we were sitting in a medical center with the puzzles around us. These are the type of people I'm usually hanging out with. And I feel so bad. Physically, I'm feeling terrible. But I'm also, the reality's setting in. I'm looking down on my hand, and it's got stitches all down it and dried blood all over my arm. And I can't move my fingers anymore because I cut through my tendons. Just not to be too graphic, but I was putting in the state of mind I was in. I was feeling really terrible about myself. And for whatever reason, I had a moment of clarity. I'd prayed many times. At one point, I remember driving around at a low bottom, and I cut out this little picture of Jesus and put him on my dashboard, thinking that would help me change my life. And when I was in a really bad spot, I'd pray. And I grew up Catholic, so I could say the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Glory Be, in any state of consciousness. But I just started praying, and Nothing drastic happened that day, but I was in such a bad spot. I thought about all the people I'd hurt and how much I'd ruined my life, and I was so tired of doing the same things over and over again. And I went to bed that night and was just plagued with a bunch of super vivid nightmares, and waking up terrified and scared and not knowing what I was going to do with my life. And I just, I prayed again. And I ended up in this the head psychiatrist's office or little room that you go to. They pull you off the ward and it's your turn to see the shrink. And I was just waiting for a diagnosis of like, you're bipolar with this disorder and here's what's wrong with you and here's the little cup with the medicine in it. If you take this for 7 days, you're going to be normal. I thought that's how life worked. Since coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, I realized for me there's no magic wand. I wanted the elevator solution, something easy. And I remember he looked at me and he looked at my medical records and all the hospital visits I've had and all the other medical stuff and prescriptions I was on, and he just said, you're an alcoholic and you got polysubstance abuse disorder, I think is the term he used, and you need to get some treatment. And I was actually really angry when he said that, and I felt like a sense of hopelessness essentially, because I had heard that before from all the court-ordered classes I had to take. And he pointed at this guy walking down the hall pushing the med cart wearing scrubs, and he said, "That's Steve. Steve's an alcoholic. He hasn't had a drink in 7 years." And he started talking about Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was in one ear out the other. And I remember then he recommended I go to treatment. The next day I came back and I saw him and I said, "Sure, I'll go." And thus went my journey to rehab. And the things I'll say about that is that was the first time I sat in a room and saw signs like this with the 12 steps on it. I remember meeting with the counselor the first day I was there, and he told me about the 12 steps and read with me the first step, and that was the biggest sense of relief I'd ever seen. And for me, I never realized that there was other people just like me, and that could be actually the problem I had. And if I could define that problem, maybe, and they're saying there's an answer, maybe my life can change. It was kind of like a relief, because I thought it was some undiagnosable, problem that I was never going to find the answer to. So I went through that. I remember hearing some speakers like very early on that came in an H&I meeting, and I really believe that's an important thing to this day for myself to try and participate in, because like these guys just told their stories. They were average people. I think the guy had been sober for 2 years or something like that, and he shared his story, and I could relate to the DUIs and the car crashes and the family problems. And then he talked about how he was sober and he was in there today in 2 years recovery, and I just could not believe that he was telling the truth. It's like, there's no way this guy's sober. And so I leave there, and they kind of basically gave me the 4 or 5 things I'm supposed to do. Like, go to an AA meeting, get a sponsor, get a network, get a home group, something like that. And I remember I went to the little AA meeting. There was a clubhouse about 8 minutes from my parents' house. I never even knew it was there. I used to, do illegal activities in the parking lot, but apparently there was an AA meeting there. And I show up to this place, and it was like a cold November night, and I remember sitting out front just chain smoking cigarettes, looking through the window. My parents had to drop me off because I didn't have a license, and I'd moved back in with them, which was a terrible idea. I was just terrified to go inside, and I saw the guy up at the podium getting ready to chair the meeting. He was wearing a tie, and I was like, oh man, this guy must be the guy who's in charge. And later I found out he was just like 30 days, 6 months sober. He worked at a department store, and he had to wear that to work every day. But, I was like, he's this important person, and they're not going to want me in here. And I remember walking in finally and just getting the courage, just walking those doors. And I would sit in these meetings, and I would always feel a sense of relief going in there and hearing people, like the fine people in here tonight, share their experience, strength, and hope. And then I would always make sure I had a chance to share my experience, strength, and hope with 30 days sober. I didn't get that message about just being quiet and listening. I thought I had something to say. And I went to meetings for a while. I was going every day. That's the one thing probably did right, was I was praying and I was going to meetings. And but I wasn't working the steps, and I wasn't working with a sponsor. And what I can tell you from that experience is I did not get better. My life actually felt like it got worse in a lot of ways. I wasn't drinking, but my life felt so unmanageable, and all I could think about was all the consequences and the court dates coming up, and all the stuff that I'd left behind drinking that I was able to blur out before were now just, sitting right in front of me. And I had no relief. I didn't know how to feel better. I didn't know how to, find peace. I didn't know what serenity felt like at all, and couldn't even comprehend that concept yet. And I wanted to drink every day still. I had that obsession. But at the same time, I knew that to drink meant to go into a state that I didn't know what was going to happen to me, and I was probably going to find some worse consequences. So I was stuck in that terrible dilemma of, wanting to change. And, the book talks about it as like this jumping off place where you can't imagine life with or without alcohol. And I remember I moved. The one other smart thing I did is I moved into an Oxford house. I found a couple of guys around that group who were like, hey, why don't you come move in this house? You're going to get a lot more support there. Maybe that's not the case for everybody, but it worked out pretty well for me. And I had a roommate I really liked, and he was a little bit older than me, and he had been to AA before, and he had a car, and he would drive me to meetings. And, I remember praying before one of those meetings, and I just asked God to help me find a sponsor. And I met this guy, and he had just moved to town. He was from Florida. He had 17 years sober, and, I heard him tell the story in a meeting, being new to town. And I just worked at the courage and walked up to this guy and said, hey, can you help me out and sponsor me? It's always uncomfortable when you're new asking someone to sponsor you. It's like, asking someone to dance or something. But, of course, he said he'd be glad to. And, why don't you show up tomorrow at 11 a.m. and we'll sit down and meet. And I remember he sat there and we talked about my drinking. He told me about his. And I was like, man, this guy's just like me. And that language of the heart, and just one alcoholic sitting with another, talking about not just the problem and what it's like to drinking, but the solution he'd found. And this guy, changed my life. He would meet with me regularly. We started sitting down and reading through the big book together, and taking the steps. And he would just pick me up and take me to meetings and talk to me in the car. And I'd call him with the craziest stuff going on. And he would just listen, and then he would give me, his experience. And sometimes he would, be a little tough on me. But I remember working that third step with him, and that fourth step, and the fifth step, and it was about that time after I got through those first half of those steps that the obsession to drink left me. And I just remember one day feeling like I realizing that I wasn't drinking anymore, or thinking about drinking anymore, and which is baffling to me because I never understood how you could change your thinking. Like if there's these thoughts you have, how do you just stop having thoughts? But that was one of the miracles that happened because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I stopped thinking about drinking, and I started to feel peace about being alone by myself or doing something that, normally I'd be obsessing about a drink. I could go do those things. And, that was the first thing. And I remember reading in the big book talking about after your fifth step, what those promises looked like and what would happen in your life. And it was like they were reading my mind. And I knew there was something to this program. So I kept working the steps of my sponsor. And, I'm so thankful I found the guy I did, because he made it very clear that, this wasn't about just going to a bunch of meetings. It wasn't about, just praying a bunch and becoming real spiritual. Obviously, I should be doing those things, but, the way we get better is by carrying the message to other alcoholics to go help somebody. And he would tell me, like, go find somebody to help. Like your job is to go find somebody. I don't care if you've not sponsored someone before or you don't know what you're doing. Pick them up and take them to a meeting. You live in a halfway house. Take the new guys in your meeting, your house to the meeting. And so I just started to try and do that, and was advised, like, hey, if you see someone in a meeting and you've never seen them before, they're staring down, looking at their shoelaces, go up and introduce yourself. Give them your number. Get their number. And, within a month or so, a guy asked me to sponsor him. It didn't go well. He didn't stay sober, but, I did. And I know for a fact today I'm sober because of that. And, at this time, I had the worst job in early sobriety. Maybe someone else in here has me beat, but I didn't have a car. I didn't have a license. And so you're kind of like, okay, what's within walking distance that will, who's going to hire me? And this, I feel bad for kids nowadays because you have to go online and fill everything out. But I would just, walk to every retail shop and ask for an application if they're hiring. And I really wanted to work at Trader Joe's. Like, that was the cool place to work. And they turned me down. And the only place that would hire me was Staples. and I was stocking shelves at Staples. And I'll tell you, that is the boringest job you'll ever have. Just like 80s music playing. You know, I've got one of those carts full of like Post-it notes and printer paper. And, doing that for 8 hours a day, you'll want to shoot yourself. It's terrible. But so that was my job. That was my life at the time. I was working at Staples. I was walking to and from work. It was tough. I won't say that every day was just like a spiritual experience. Like I was rebuilding my life, and I didn't know how it was ever going to look better. I was trying to pay back money, and I was trying to be independent and make my own way and live off $400 a week or whatever I made. And I remember my sponsor being like, hey, look, you're still pretty young. You don't have any credit card debt. You should go back to school. Why don't you try going back to community college and see if you can finish up your associate's degree, and if that's, a better opportunity. And I'm not saying that's the best thing for everybody else, but for me, it was part of my journey to like go and do something again. And I think the real significance was like just not being afraid to live life. It would have been easy to hide and just not do anything. And it can look very different for a lot of people, but that was something I always wanted, to have some kind of higher education and go do something in life. And so I enrolled back in Wake Tech, and didn't do very well. I think my first semester I made it through with like 2 C's and 2 B's or something like that. And eventually I remember getting to this point. I was taking this math class, and I was telling my sponsor, like, I can't do this. I'm going to fail out. And my MO was I would usually withdraw from school as soon as it got hard. It's like, I got something better to do, or this is stupid. I don't want to work. I want to go work or something. But it was truthfully, I was just afraid. And I told him, I can't do this. I might as well go drink. I'm a loser. I'm an adult loser. I'm never going to be able to do anything in life. And he was like, hey man, you're saying you're going to fail. If you're going to fail it, why don't you just study anyways, show up and take the test. And if you fail, then maybe you go drink or do whatever you're talking about. Why don't you at least follow through? And I took his suggestion. I didn't like it, but I went and showed up, and I studied and took this test, and I got a B. I was like, oh, wow, I did that. And that was kind of what life was like for the next couple of years. I would just show up, I would listen to my sponsor, I would ignore the thoughts I had, and I would just take the action. And stop worrying about the results, just take the action. And amazingly, when you do that, your life gets better. You change, you grow through a lot of stuff. And I remember I finished up my little 2-year stint at Wake Tech, and I was going to apply to colleges. And, I'd failed out of community college so many times. My GPA was still like a 2.8 or something. And I really didn't want to move. And I wanted to go to NC State, the only college in town. I knew I wasn't getting to Carolina or Duke, and they weren't going to take me. But I wasn't going to apply, and this guy, it was a friend of mine, was like, hey man, why don't you just apply anyways? The worst that's going to happen is you spend $50 and they reject you, and then you don't have to think about what it could have been. So I took the advice, and a couple weeks later in the mail, I get this envelope from NC State, and they accepted me. I didn't even meet the GPA requirement, but they accepted me. Don't know why that happened, but that was one of those miracles of like, wow, if I stay sober and keep showing up and try, my life might just get better. So, fast forward, looking at my life, like I ended up going to NC State, and I graduated with honors, which is crazy to think about, because I was the guy who couldn't even pass, pre-algebra in high school. Like I just wasn't someone who was able to apply myself. But, I got this advice, and I think it applies to anything, but they said, hey, just treat it like AA. Your teacher is your sponsor. Pretend the literature of that classroom is the big book. Show up early, stay late, be a service, talk to other people there in fellowship, and you'll probably do okay. And that's kind of how I've approached everything. I mean, the principles in AA, even the silly things about just being committed, being where you say you're going to be, doing what you say you're going to do. It is amazing how much my life has changed just by doing that alone. The other thing, and I'm not Bill Wilson by any means, but there was a lot of things I probably could have been doing to be responsible, but like my phone would be ringing, and it would be a guy asking to take into a meeting. I would just drop things and try and help people. And what's amazing, what I've learned over the years, it doesn't matter how busy I've been, that God always makes time to do his work. Like if someone needs help or someone asks me to sponsor them, maybe I'm meeting them at 5 a.m, but time and space just seems to bend, and I still get everything done that I was going to get done, and maybe I help someone stay sober. And my life has changed so much from Alcoholics Anonymous that I've accepted the fact that, I will have to live a life before I get to live a second one, but it might not be the way I think it should be. And, I've turned my will and my life over to the care of God. I said, do with me as you will. Whatever that is, whatever happens from this moment on, it's what God thinks is supposed to happen, is the way I look at it. So I just try and live that way. Maybe whatever I do to help somebody else or be a service in Alcoholics Anonymous, that's the highest purpose and the blessing that I get to live in my life, because I'm getting a second chance. What I found is that it's never slowed me down or taken away, and if anything, it's helped me achieve more and live a more free life, more peaceful life, happier life. There's been times in my sobriety where, over the past 10 years where I had little stints where I got so busy and I'm traveling for work now that I couldn't make it to as many meetings. And, it becomes a little easier not to answer that phone when you're, out of town and you're running between things. I don't have enough time. I'll call the guy back tomorrow. Amazingly, my life just seems to get a lot worse when that happens. I get stressed out. I start getting ungrateful. I start feeling entitled. And I find myself in a place where all I'm thinking about is myself again, my problems. It's all about me. And I realize that's not the way. I know where that life leads. It's unhappiness. It's funny, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't think I was selfish. I remember one of the first meetings I was in, there were people talking, talking about selfishness and self-centeredness and self-will run riot. I just couldn't understand what people were talking about. And this is before I did a 4-step. But, what I realized later was that, the only person I ever thought about was me. What was in it for me? How was I going to be affected? What am I losing? What am I getting? And that just leads, like our literature says, to a life of unhappiness. And I'm not perfect by any means today. I'm not like St. Francis, but I found that with the 12 steps, I have a process to kind of remind me of what I should be doing, how I should be focusing my energy, what I should be, doing for somebody else. There's an inventory process. When I think I was 8 years sober, I will tell you it was by a series of luck that I ended up in this job that I was not qualified for. I was absolutely terrified at the time. And my boss, the lady who became my boss, came to me and said, hey, I have a job opportunity for you within the company, but you got to move. Do you want to take this opportunity? And I was like, let me think about it. Obviously, it would be a huge opportunity, and call my sponsor. I was like, man, they want me to move for this job. It's what I've always wanted to do. I was just hoping I wouldn't have to move to do it. And he advised me to write it on paper and think about it. And, I went through that whole process and prayed and realized, okay, this is, there's reasons I should do it. So I moved when I was 8 years sober to Richmond, Virginia. And I thought that I was just going to be able to do everything I did, within my home group, just move, and all of a sudden I would have the same network and the same people and the same routines and all the same, easy, I say easy, but like the same AA lifestyle in a new city. And none of that magically happens. If any of you have moved in sobriety or are going to move at some point, it did not happen for me. And I was just going to meetings. You don't know anybody. You don't know who's who. And I found myself, again, very, worried. The job wasn't going well, by the way. I'm in sales. I didn't sell anything for a year. So I'm sitting there every day, sitting in front of my computer, cold calling people. No one's answering my phone calls. Like, oh man, I'm going to get fired. Just bought this house up here. Just had my third kid. And I remember calling my sponsor. I was driving into the city for whatever work thing, and I'm like so stressed out, so anxious. I'm like starting to tear up in the eyes. I don't know if you ever felt that stressed out. And it's like, why don't you find someone to help? You don't have control over this. Go put your energy into something you can control. Don't worry about the results. So I was like, all right, maybe I should go help somebody. So I start showing up to these meetings, and I find this guy. He lives 45 minutes from me. He asked me to sponsor him. It's not the most ideal scenario. But I remember my first sponsor always say, you know, what are you looking for, a doctor, a lawyer? You know, whoever it is, ask for help them. So I'd pick this guy up every night, and I'd drive him to a meeting at my home group, which was another 30 minutes from his house, and then I would leave, and I'd drop him off, and then I'd drive home. And man, it was like the longest days ever. You know, I'm just trying to help this guy, and, you know, miraculously, all of a sudden my life starts to get better. It's the strangest thing. My job turns around, things at home start changing, I stop arguing with my wife, you know, and I remember that, you know, just stop thinking of you and go think of somebody else, and it just rearranges your life. And it was something that I've not forgotten, you know, that effect. Like, it changed my perspective on things. So lucky enough that, like, things changed, and I got to move back home and rejoin my old home group and reestablish connections with all my old friends in Apex and Raleigh, and live close to my family. Today I have 4 kids, 19, 11, 9, and 7. My oldest one's in college today. She's never drank. Oh, I'm sorry, she's not. She's drank. Actually, I've learned that. She's not an alcoholic, but I remember when she was like 10 years old, she was getting dragged to us AA meetings. She's actually technically my stepdaughter, but I adopted her at an early age. But like, she would come to meetings with us all the time. You know, we were those people, and like, she grew up in AA. And I remember she was like 10 years old. And we said, "Do you know what an alcoholic is?" And she said, "Yeah, it's someone who doesn't drink." And like, that was her perception of what an alcoholic was. You know, and you know, she's got her own personal relationship with God. And I have the other 3 kids. So far, so good. They're great kids, and they've taught me a lot about, you know, areas I still need to grow, and a different type of service. And it's also been kind of like a different phase of life, because, you know, when you don't have kids and you live in a halfway house, you can go to a lot of meetings. You can go out to dinner every time. You can go to every coffee. You can be at every anniversary, every potluck on the 4th of July and Thanksgiving, every little alkathon. You know, it's not that easy anymore. And I've had to learn to balance, you know, being of service to my family and still helping them. But, you know, someone asks me to help them, or I've got a commitment to my home group, that I can still do that and not turn it down. And it feels like impossible at times. I'm not going to lie. Anybody who has kids and a demanding job and a wife that you know you want to have a good relationship with, like, it's hard to do it all. And I've found that people who are really willing will meet you at 5 in the morning. It's actually pretty impressive. But sometimes I have long days, and it's, you know, again, I don't do AA perfect. You can ask my home group members, but I try and do it the best I can. I'm active in my home group. I try and do a service commitment. I try and sponsor people when they ask me, and occasionally get to come here and speak at places like this. People don't know me that well. Believe maybe I've got a good story, but yeah, I think that's about all I have to say. And just, you know, if you're new here today, it's funny. I was thinking about this when I was coming here. I remember being like 45 days sober. I'm sitting on the front porch of my parents' house, still living there. My life is a complete wreck. I'm crying on my front porch, you know, snot bubbles, and just feeling sorry for myself. And I truly believed that I could never put my life back together, and nothing good could ever happen. I was going to be an adult loser for the rest of my life. And for whatever reason, I called this guy up in the group that I had kind of gotten, like, talked to occasionally, and I just, "Hey man, I'm in a really bad spot. My life's over. You know, I'm a loser. It's never going to get better." And he told me that, you know, if you keep coming back, you're going to have more friends and more connections and relationships and meaning and purpose in your life than you could ever imagine. You won't be able to understand it today, but don't stop coming. You know, the miracle is going to happen in your life if you work these steps. And I didn't believe him. Like, I got off the phone, I was like, "That guy didn't help me. I'm going to, you know, call the next person who will hear my sad story." But that's true today. You know, I got here today and I got to talk to Steve, Blake, and Lynn, like all these people, and just had a, you know, and I'm in a city an hour away from mine. And it's truly a blessing. So if you're here tonight, Alcoholics Anonymous does work. It does. You got to work the steps. Don't just go to meetings. Don't drink and go to meetings, but take the action. Find the people who are here sticking their hand out, and just do whatever they do. Just follow them around and show up to everything, and just make this thing your full-time job, and your life will change. Thanks.